gears, we'll talk about a living donation. So I come from Cleveland. Cleveland Clinic is in between Chicago and New York, by one of the Great Lakes across Canada. As you can see here, the main Cleveland Clinic is it's a big institution. It's a main campus. There are 30,000 employees, and it's a big, large center. We do about 160 kidney transplants a year, and half of them, about 80 or 90, are from living donors. So we do a lot of living donor evaluations. Living kidney donation, as you know, is practiced practically in most of the world. In the shaded here in gray, you can see all the countries where living kidney donation occurs. This is data as of 2009. We are talking about 9 years ago. By then, 27,000 living kidney donors happen every year, so I'm sure the number is higher now. It represents in the United States about 35–40% of all the living kidney donors, and now about 10% of those living kidney donor transplantations happen through exchange chains, for pair exchange. So that number is growing as well. Here is the rank of countries based on, in red you see Egypt, but the rank of countries based on absolute numbers of living donor kidney transplantations every year. On the top you see the United States. In the first, so I don't have a marker here, but on where it says absolute number of living kidney donor transplants, that's the actual number. The United States, India, Brazil, Ireland, Mexico, they lead the rank here. Egypt comes in on top 15. When you calculate the number of transplants per million population, you can see that Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iceland, Iran, USA are on the top. Again, this is data from 2009. There's no updated information, but it's a representative of what may be happening now. So what is a living kidney donor? And a living kidney donor is a mentally and physically healthy individual. So mentally and physically healthy individual who voluntarily donates a kidney because of an altruistic motive, and does so in the absence of any type of coercion. And the nephrectomy itself exposes the donor, the individual, to a medical and surgical risk that it would not exist unless he or she donated a kidney. So there's no biological need to donate a kidney. There's no biological need to be exposed to a surgery. They do it because they have the mode of donation. So, going back to the beginning of a living kidney donation, you will only accept a living donor, a subject, an individual who is completely healthy. We know that time changes, and here we have data from several large centers. I'm sorry I don't have a pointer, but here you see data from centers like Mayo Clinic, Alabama, and Minnesota. And on that graph you see the age of donation, and then on the y-axis you see the year of donation, and you can see how living donors used to be in the mid-30s, and now they're in the mid-40s. On the other side of the graph you have the Cleveland Clinic data on 1,200 donors, and you can see that from 1976 to 2005, when we published this paper, the age of the donor also was higher. So donors are getting older. The other things that are happening is they're not just only getting older, but also they're getting heavier. The BMI is going up. Their blood pressure is higher over time. And then the diastolic blood pressure is lower, but the systolic blood pressure is higher because they are older individuals. So we're dealing with now a little bit older population. And with that, you carry some comorbidities that they occur as we get older. So in general, current donors tend to be older, non-biologically related, heavier, have higher systolic blood pressure and fasting plasma glucose than donors in prior decades. So it used to be that we said a living kidney donor can donate a kidney when the GFR is more than 80. There's no substance to say that. That comes from a paper from the Norwegian publications where that number actually came from the outcomes of the recipients of donors with a GFR of more or less than 80. But in reality, you need to think about what would be the right GFR for someone to donate based on the impact to that particular individual. So recently, KDIGO attempted to come up with, or they came up with guidelines to evaluate living kidney donors. And among the guidelines, you have the ones for kidney function evaluation. What do they recommend is that, sorry, you cannot read very clearly there, but they are online, that the GFR should be measured by, milliliters per minute by 1.73 meters square rather than creatinine clearance. They recommend that you start screening with an estimated GFR, and then you move on with the measurement of actual kidney function, ideally with a measurement with a hypothalamic GFR or something similar. But if you don't have it, just creatinine clearance is good enough as long as it's well collected. If you don't have any of those, then you can use estimated equation, but that's debatable. So they now recommend that the GFR should be above 90. Below 60, you should not proceed with donation. If it's between 60 and 90, then you will have to decide based on the characteristics of the donor. Now they leave it very open there, and you can see that the recommendations are not great because there's no data. At the Cleveland Clinic, when we look at our data, you can see in blue here the GFR. On the y-axis, you can see the age of the donor. On the x-axis, you can see the measured GFR with low hypothalamic GFRs on all the living donors as they come from living donor evaluation. And in blue, you can see those donors who were evaluated, and in red, those who were evaluated by decline. The ones in blue, they donated a kidney. And as I mentioned before, our donors are getting older, they're getting heavier, and therefore when you adjust for body surface area and everything, the GFR has been trending down over decades. But you can see here that those who have medical reasons to be disqualified had a much lower GFR, a much faster decline in kidney function than those who had a normal GFR. But the important thing to remark here is that some people who are 65 and donated a kidney, they may have a GFR that is less than 90 or 80, and for their age and gender might be okay. So we came up with this table, for example, for our institution, in which you can see if you're a lady at the age of 25, the mean GFR is 114, but if you get a lady that is 60 years old, then the mean GFR is 91. And if you look at the lower 5th percentile of all donors who donated, you can even go down to about a GFR of 65 or 70. Now that's a little bit too low nowadays, but that's the case. You have to individualize based on age and gender. As you all know, I summarized this in the paper in situation. And after we donate a kidney, the remaining kidney, you do 50% of the kidney function, the remaining kidney compensates, and you end up with about 65 to 70% of your kidney function, baseline kidney function. So if you start with a GFR of 70, and you may end up will be with a GFR of less than 60 after donation, depending on the age. Now, this is a very important thing that we published quite a bit now recently with Andrew from Mayo Clinic. We do implant biopsies when we donate the kidney. So when we do a kidney donor, so we get a living kidney donor, we do an implant biopsy, and then we do protocol biopsies. But so we can assess the histology of these donors. And the very interesting thing, this is the data from Mayo Clinic, but we have combined data from Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic, and I'm not showing it today, but we published a paper in July of this year in the New Journal of Medicine on measuring kidney function in living donors in relation to histology. But you can see that now, if you look at the implant biopsies of all these living donors and you believe they are healthy, you can see there's a lot of nephroclerosis in it. And if you are at the age of 40 to 49, let's say, 28% of all these living donors will have some degree of nephroclerosis, defined as some glomerulosclerosis, interstitial fibrosis, arterial hydrinosis, decrease in the lumen of the arteriosclerosis. So it's quite common, and the older we get, the more we have in the renal histology. So this is kind of like what you expect today when you do when you evaluate these living donors. Now, the next area, and we'll come back to the GFR, is the recommendations of metabolic disorder. That's the other big problem that we now face. So donors with BMI more than 40 should be excluded. We at the clinic have a cutoff of 35. Most of the centers do 30, 32 or lower to accept, or we ask them to lose weight. Those with diabetes mellitus should be excluded. In some countries like Japan, they accept them, but in general they should be excluded. And then we should individualize the decision based on the long-term risk of end-stage stage kidney disease in those patients who have a glucose intolerance. And if they have hyperlipidemia, smoking, hypertension, we should try to control them before or donation. Now, at Mayo Clinic, they studied living donors with a BMI more than 35, and the 1-year outcome was pretty good, and then you know that the long-term outcome is the most important thing here, but hypertension was more common, I'm sure, because of weight, although the kidney function remained similar among the groups. Now, the increased risk for diabetes is commonly seen. 25% of the population will end up with diabetes, and 25% of people who have glucose intolerance will end up with diabetes. So it's quite common to see that the glucose intolerance, as defined as a glucose less than 126, fasting glucose. So donors with a family history of diabetes, these are recommendations by Kedigo, but donors with a family history of diabetes should be evaluated with oral glucose tolerance test or glycosylated hemoglobin, which is what we do. There's a study in Japan where they studied 71 Japanese donors who had diabetes. Recall that there's no deceased donation, so mostly it's living donation. And they reported that the patients didn't have any end-stage kidney disease after 8 months of follow-up. Donors with diabetes are mostly excluded, but guidelines for those with impaired glucose control are less well defined. In the US, UNOS does not permit us to accept a donor with established diabetes, but they are okay, or you can decide if they have a glucose intolerance. Hassan Ibrahim from University of Minnesota followed up 3,700 kidney donors, mostly Caucasians, with a long-term follow-up, more than 11 years of follow-up. And when he looked at the long-term outcomes, 154 patients had developed diabetes. And the risk factors prior to donation were the only risk factors that he identified were male, but mostly BMI more than 30 at time of donation, and a family history of type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. The interesting thing is that type 1 diabetes, that's mostly an autoimmune disease in some circumstances. It happens during adolescence most of the time. So if the donor is like 30 or 40, you would not expect to have a development of type 2 diabetes. But there's increased risk of diabetes in those donors who donated to a relative with type 1 diabetes. Now, this is what we face nowadays. It's not just diabetes, it's not hypertension, it's a little bit of everything. It's a combo of everything. And this is kind of like defining metabolic syndrome. And as you can see here, these are donors from large centers in the US. You can see that there's a tremendous overlap between obesity, glucose intolerance, and hypertension. And some of them have the three of them. So the more you have, the more likely to develop something, no? So nowadays, you don't get the pristine living donor with one thing or nothing. They get a little bit of everything. So we decided to study metabolic syndrome, which is a concept in which you put everything together. If you have three of the following, you have metabolic syndrome: hypertension, obesity, glucose intolerance, low LDH or triglyceride levels. And what we found is, number one, they tend to be older and male, those with metabolic syndrome, and of course they have hypertension and all the stuff, or higher blood pressure, not hypertension. But then, when we do the implant biopsy, you can see that those with metabolic syndrome, 29% of them, they had nephroclerosis in the kidney versus only 9% of those who had no metabolic syndrome. And the most interesting thing is that the GFR, of course, declined a little bit faster in those with metabolic syndrome than in those who didn't have metabolic syndrome. So we asked them to change now to lose weight. And when they lose weight, actually, you can see that the blood pressure goes down as expected, the triglycerides get better as expected, the HDL gets better, and the fasting blood glucose gets better. So they are motivated, and this is what we should do. We should ask them to lose weight to correct the metabolic syndrome in order to proceed with donation. Hypertension. We take hypertensive donors in the US as long as they're Caucasian and the blood pressure is very well controlled. There's now good data. Well, that's not good data. There's some data that it's okay in the short term. We don't know in the very long term. I'm going to advance here a little bit faster because I want to show you something at the end. Now be aware that systolic blood, that office blood pressure might be misleading. About 13% of patients with office blood pressure that are normal or high, they can be classified as having hypertension, white coat hypertension, so we do ABPM in all these patients, all donors. Hematuria. Hematuria, you should evaluate hematuria just like in any other patient. Key thing, a lot of the times these patients come to see us with to do the evaluation at the time of we do the UA, we see a positive dipstick but no RBCs, and a lot of the times it's because they're having drinking a lot of water, because we ask them to do that for the isothalamic GFR or the creatinine clearance, and the specificity is very low, so the cells get lyse and you may not see them under the microscope, but they do have some hematuria. If they do, then we do a full evaluation and actually we do a biopsy. So you do a biopsy, and it's very common, you can see 1 to 15% of the population, and we do a biopsy and then we determine whether we can proceed or not. There's one paper by Berkasicki's group in transplantation. There are several papers, but the point to remark here that from 13 patients they evaluated, 4 of them didn't want to do a biopsy and they didn't want to proceed, but from the other 9 patients, 2 had normal biopsies, the other had abnormal biopsies, mostly thin basement membrane disease, and a lot of them proceeded with donation. Last year we biopsied 3 patients, only one young guy had MPGA and the other 2 biopsies were normal, so they proceed with donation. The person with the MPGA, we have to tell them before that if we are going to do a biopsy, we might disclose a new disease, and they need to be aware of that. So consenting is very important. Nephrolithiasis, most centers take 1 kidney stone. We take 1 kidney stone. We had our experience here. We reported 732 patients that donated a kidney. The recurrence rate is very low. Only 1 of the 732 had a second kidney stone after follow-up. So, in conclusion, living kidney transplantation is the best therapeutic option for patients with end-stage kidney disease. Many kidney donors are not completely healthy nowadays. But prevalent comorbidities like overweight, metabolic syndrome do not contraindicate donation, but it's very important to secure post-donation follow-up. Thank you very much.